You were a mistake we never wanted, Emily." Those were the words my father spat at me the night I refused to hand over the $22 million my grandparents left me. Hours earlier, I thought the inheritance was just about honoring Clara and Victor's legacy. But my parents? To them, I was nothing more than an obstacle, something to be discarded the moment I stopped being useful. Imagine hearing that from the people who raised you. My chest still burns when I replay it, my own blood choosing greed over me. And the worst part? That cruelty didn't stop there. The very next morning, when I thought I'd found refuge in my grandparents' Victorian home, my family showed up, ready to evict me from the only place I had left. But what they saw waiting inside stopped them cold, and in that frozen silence, I realized everything I thought I knew about love, family, and loyalty was about to shatter. If you've ever felt betrayed by the people who should have protected you, don't hesitate. Drop me a "I feel you" in the comments. And now, let me take you back to where it all began. I'm Emily, 28 years old, and I live in a small, cluttered studio in San Francisco. It's one of those places where you can never escape the feeling that the walls are closing in on you. But at the same time, it's the only place that truly feels like home. Yoga mats are always out, scattered across the floor, worn from years of use. It's not much, but when I spread them out and begin my practice, I find peace. I teach community yoga classes, most of them free, because honestly, it feels good to give back, but between rent and bills, I barely scrape by. Every month, I hold my breath until payday, trying not to count the days too much. But you know what? I don't mind. In fact, I'd take this any day over the life my parents live. They've always been obsessed with the next paycheck, the next promotion, the next shiny thing that promises happiness. I can hear my dad now in that smug tone. "Emily, you need a real job, something that's going to get you somewhere." They don't get it. They never will. Teaching yoga isn't about money for me. It's about connection. It's about watching someone take a deep breath and let go of their worries, even if just for a moment. And that feels richer than any paycheck my parents ever got. It's hard to explain, but my life feels complete, even though I don't have much. I find joy in the small moments. Walking through Golden Gate Park, surrounded by fog, I can almost hear the whispers of the trees in the breeze. The air is cool and damp, and the smell of fresh earth rises from the ground. It feels like everything slows down when I'm out there, like the world isn't rushing me. This life, with its simplicity, is mine, and it feels enough. But there's always been something inside of me, a feeling that's both comforting and heavy. Something I've carried with me from childhood, something that never quite lets me go. My grandparents, Clara and Victor, raised me in their old Victorian home, and that house, it was my sanctuary. It wasn't just a house, it was a library. Their basement was like a maze of books, stacked high from floor to ceiling. It was there that they built their empire, a chain of indie bookstores that became the heartbeat of the city. They didn't do it for the money. They did it for the love of books, for the love of people, for the love of a good story. I didn't know it then, but they had a secret. Over the years, Clara and Victor had accumulated a fortune, $22 million from investments. They never told anyone. It was locked away in a safe, a well-kept secret. But more than money, they left me something else, a legacy, a set of values that I now carry with me day by day. I can still see Clara's warm smile as she carefully shelved the books, the sound of the pages flipping as she ran her fingers over the spines. That sound, that smell of old paper, has always stayed with me. "Integrity is worth more than gold, Emily," she used to say. "Never forget that." In a world that pushed me to chase money, they taught me something different. They taught me that wealth is fleeting, but character, honesty, and hard work, those things last. Sometimes I wonder what they would think of my life now. They had so little, but in many ways, they had everything. They were never after wealth for the sake of wealth. Their richness was in the moments they shared, the people they helped, the books they introduced to the world. But my parents? They never understood that. They scoffed at my grandparents' simple life, their little bookstores that had more value in stories than in stocks. I remember one summer, when I was a kid, overhearing my dad talking about Clara and Victor. His voice was full of frustration. "It's just a hobby to them," he said. "They could be so much more if they'd just let me take over." But it wasn't about being more. It was about something my parents would never understand. Something Clara and Victor had in abundance: integrity. I never expected anything from my grandparents. Sure, they had money. I just didn't care. They never showed it. Their wealth was never the point. I was too busy absorbing their wisdom, their values, hidden away in the dusty corners of their book-filled home. But as I walk these foggy trails in the park, reflecting on my life, I realize they didn't just leave me books. They left me something much heavier. They left me their legacy, and with it comes a responsibility that I'm only now starting to feel. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just the weather, the fog rolling in thick around me. But there's a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Something doesn't feel right. I've always known my grandparents had secrets. But now, I wonder if there's more to their story than I ever realized. What if that 22 million wasn't the only thing they were hiding? I keep thinking about it, about the strange tension in my family, the way my parents never seemed to care about what mattered most. They only cared about money. And I can't help but feel that there's more to it. The lessons Clara and Victor taught me, the love they gave me, it feels like it's all being tested now. As I walk through the park, the fog swirling around me, I can't shake the feeling that everything is about to change. This simple, peaceful life I've built for myself, it feels like it's all about to come undone. And I don't know if I'm ready for what's coming, but one thing's for sure. No matter what happens, I won't forget the lessons they taught me. I won't forget what they stood for. They're a part of me now. And I'll carry that with me no matter how this all plays out. Growing up, my life was a constant balancing act. There was always a tug-of-war between two worlds, the one my parents wanted for me and the one my grandparents shaped me to love. I never felt like I truly belonged in either one. Mark and Lisa, my parents, were always chasing something, always trying to get ahead. My dad worked in tech sales, always buried in his phone, his voice full of numbers and jargon, while my mom hustled in real estate, always dressed in the latest fashions, walking into rooms like she owned them. Their condo? It was sleek, shiny, cold, really. It was full of glass tables, chrome furniture, and sharp, clean lines. Every room felt like a showroom, but it didn't feel like home. It never did. I spent more time in that sterile environment than I care to admit, feeling small in a place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. The contrast to Clara and Victor's house couldn't have been more jarring. When I think about it now, their Victorian home was so different. It was a sanctuary, not just because of the cozy rooms, but because of what it represented. It was warm, with old wood floors that creaked underfoot, and bookshelves filled with stories that shaped me. There was always a scent in the air, like leather, dust, and the faintest hint of cinnamon. Every summer, I'd escape to their world, away from the cold, emotionless condo where I felt like a visitor. With them, I could breathe. They taught me to love books, to embrace community fairs, to savor simple moments. I loved how the air felt thick with stories and ideas at the fairs, where the world seemed so much brighter and friendlier. I never wanted to leave, but as much as I loved being there, it was clear my parents didn't. I remember it like it was yesterday, the day my dad scowled at Clara and Victor's old Honda. He was standing by the car, his arms crossed, frowning. I was probably about 12 at the time, and I didn't understand why he hated that car so much. It wasn't just the car, though. It was everything about my grandparents' life that grated on him. Their refusal to buy into the status game, to get with the times, to do things his way. You know, they could have so much more if they just let me help, he muttered under his breath, staring at the Honda like it was some kind of personal affront. That's when I started noticing the tension, the rift that had always been there, simmering just beneath the surface, between my family's drive for success and my grandparents' quiet integrity. My dad couldn't fathom their simplicity. To him, it was a personal jab, a rejection of everything he stood for, and I was caught in the middle, pulled in two directions. Part of me wanted to embrace the high-flying, status-driven life my parents represented, the constant striving, the constant ambition. But part of me wanted to stay with Clara and Victor in their cozy, book-filled haven where wealth wasn't measured by possessions or power, but by kindness, by values. I didn't know how to choose between them. It felt like both sides were pulling at me, but in different directions. I wanted to make my parents proud, but I couldn't ignore what my grandparents had taught me. Victor's words echo in my head every time I feel torn. "Money's a tool, Emily," he would say, "not your worth." His voice was always calm, steady, as if the world's chaos had no power over him. That was something I admired about him. He didn't chase wealth like my parents did. He didn't need to. He believed that integrity was more important than any paycheck. But I wasn't blind. As I grew older, I started to see how my parents' resentment simmered under the surface. I could see the way they looked at my grandparents' life, as though they were stuck in a past that didn't matter anymore. But it wasn't just about money for them. It was about control, about my dad wanting to take over the business, wanting to change what Clara and Victor had built. The idea that he couldn't control them, couldn't control their success, frustrated him. I remember him talking to my mom one night, his voice sharp, his tone full of frustration. "They'll never understand. They think their little bookstores are some kind of legacy, but they don't get it, Lisa. They could have built an empire if they'd just let me in." But they didn't. Clara and Victor wouldn't let him take over. They wouldn't let him turn their passion into another cog in the corporate machine. And that was the crack in our family. It divided us, splitting me between two very different ideas of success. I never fully understood why my dad took their simplicity so personally, why he saw their choice to stay small as some kind of attack on him. But that divide, that growing rift, only got wider with time. Every time my parents mentioned my grandparents, their voices grew colder, their criticisms sharper. It wasn't long before I had to choose a side. I could stay with my family and try to fit in with their world of ambition, or I could embrace the quiet, thoughtful life my grandparents had built. It was the hardest decision I've ever had to make. But deep down, I knew which side my heart was on. Looking back now, it's clear to me there was always something more than just the money. It wasn't about wealth. It was about values. It was about living a life that meant something, regardless of the status or the title. But as the years went on, that divide only grew. And eventually, it led to the moment that would change everything. I chose the values my grandparents taught me. I chose simplicity. I chose integrity. But that choice, it wasn't easy. And the tension, it only grew. Now, looking back, I realize how much of what I did, what I chose, was shaped by those early years. But it's also what's going to push me through the storm that's coming. 2 months ago, my world shifted in an instant. The phone rang, its shrill tone piercing the calm of my quiet apartment. My breath caught in my throat when I heard the news. Clara and Victor, my grandparents, the two people who had shaped every part of me, were gone. A boating accident. Lake Tahoe. It was the kind of tragedy that doesn't seem real. They'd gone on a rare vacation, something they never did. I never expected the next call I'd get from them would be the last. The shock of it hit me like a wave, knocking me off my feet. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The people who had taught me everything about love, about integrity, and about the true meaning of wealth, gone. Just like that. And in that moment, I realized everything had changed. The world I knew would never feel the same. But it was the funeral that really broke me. We held it at a bayside chapel overlooking the water, the lake stretching out before us like a dark, endless mirror. The air was thick with fog, almost like it was mourning with us, wrapping its cold arms around the service. Inside, the chapel was silent, save for the soft hum of murmurs from a few scattered relatives. The stained glass windows let in muted light, casting splashes of color on the stone floors, as if the very building was sighing under the weight of grief. The air felt heavy, too heavy, like every breath I took was weighed down by the reality of what had happened. I stood in the back, trying to steady myself. The numbness hit hard. I hadn't even processed the loss yet. It felt surreal, almost like a bad dream. I squeezed my arms tightly, trying to hold myself together, but every inch of me wanted to collapse. And yet when I looked around, something felt terribly off. It had been years since we had all been in the same room, and honestly, I wasn't expecting much from my family. But what I saw, it was worse than I could have imagined. Alex, my brother, sat in the front row, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his phone screen. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even looking at the service. He was scrolling, his eyes glued to whatever was on his screen, completely indifferent. It hit me like a punch to the gut. How could he sit there so detached when we just lost the people who meant everything to us? And Aunt Karen, well, she was another story. She was snapping selfies, her smile barely hidden behind a hand that she raised to her face, pretending to wipe away a tear. The camera flash went off, lighting up her face, and I could practically hear the artificiality in her movements. It was a sickening act, a performance for anyone who might be watching. Her fake sorrow was jarring, like nails on a chalkboard. How could they do this? How could they stand there, acting like they cared, when they had barely shown up for my grandparents when they were alive? I wanted to scream. I wanted to call them out right then, in front of everyone. But all I could do was stand there, numb, as the weight of their hypocrisy settled over me. The people I had once called family were pretending. They didn't care, not really, and I felt utterly alone. I couldn't even focus on the service. The words from the priest blurred into the background, barely audible, as my mind raced with the images of my family faking grief. They didn't deserve to be here. None of them did. But then, as if the universe had decided I needed one more cruel twist, Sarah, the family lawyer, approached me. Sarah had been a family friend for years, someone I trusted. She moved slowly, as if hesitant, her face drawn tight with concern. She took a step closer, her voice low enough to cut through the din of the gathering, pulling me away from the crowd. "Emily?" she began softly, almost nervously. "There's an envelope in their safe. It wasn't opened. They kept it locked away. For a reason." Her words hit me like a slap. An envelope? What was she talking about? What had they left behind? I stared at her, confusion and dread swirling inside me. The funeral was bad enough, the hypocrisy, the fake tears. But now, this? An unopened envelope? What had they been hiding? I couldn't even begin to process what Sarah was suggesting. Why would they leave something hidden? What was so important that they had to keep it locked away? There it was, a seed of doubt planted firmly in my chest. I had never suspected my grandparents of hiding anything from me, not like this. But now, with Sarah's quiet words ringing in my ears, I couldn't help but wonder. What truths had they been keeping? What had they known that no one else did? I don't understand, I whispered, barely able to form the words. My heart was racing, the anxiety beginning to flood my system. What could they have been hiding? Sarah's gaze softened, but she didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The mystery was already there, hanging between us, an invisible thread pulling me in. I needed to know what was in that envelope. I had to find out. As I stepped out of the chapel, the fog had thickened, wrapping around the church like a suffocating shroud. The world outside felt distant, cold, as if it were pressing in on me. The lake before me was a mirror of my own thoughts, still unyielding and dark. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this loss than I could see. The grief for Clara and Victor was still raw, but now there was something else. A gnawing feeling, deep in my gut, that told me this wasn't just about losing them. It was about uncovering something much bigger. I could hear the soft rush of the water against the shore, but it felt far away. My chest tightened, and I whispered into the quiet, "What are you hiding, Clara? What are you hiding, Victor?" The lake remained silent, offering no answers. But I knew, deep down, that I couldn't walk away from this. Not until I found out what that envelope contained. The questions were already eating at me, and I knew I had to face them head on. The search for the truth had just begun. I arrived early at Sarah Chen's office, my steps echoing in the quiet hallway. I was dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, an umbrella dripping from the misty fog of San Francisco. The rain had started to pick up again, but it didn't matter. My nerves were on edge, the anticipation of what was to come weighing heavily on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something much bigger than I was prepared for. Sarah's office was sleek, modern, with glass walls that overlooked the fog-covered city streets. The atmosphere inside felt like a stark contrast to the thick, damp air outside. It was cold, almost clinical in its perfection. Everything was so polished, from the polished wood floors to the clean, angular furniture. It was as if the space itself was built to contain secrets. Secrets I wasn't sure I was ready to uncover. I tried to focus, tried to calm myself as I sat in one of the chairs by the window, my fingers tapping nervously on my phone screen. The city outside was blurred, shrouded in mist. Everything felt distant, like the fog was wrapping around me, isolating me from reality. The silence was deafening, and I couldn't shake the thoughts racing through my mind. The envelope Sarah had mentioned after the funeral. What was it really about? And now, this meeting with the will? I had no idea what Clara and Victor had left behind, but I could feel that something had changed. The unease from the funeral was still heavy in my chest. The fake grief from my family, especially Alex and Aunt Karen, still stung. But what really unsettled me now was Sarah's tone, the way she'd mentioned the will. There was a certain guardedness in her eyes that made me wonder if I was about to be handed a truth I wasn't prepared to face. I barely had time to settle before my family started storming into the office. Dad was the first one through the door, glancing at his smartwatch, his eyes scanning the room with impatience. His crisp suit and tight posture seemed out of place in the relaxed modern space. Behind him, Mom followed with her designer bag swinging from her arm, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. I could already see the tension in their movements, like they couldn't wait to get this over with. I tried to focus on their body language, my father's tight lips, his attempt to mask the tension with small talk, and my mother's fidgeting, her hand pulling at her bag strap every few seconds. They were here, but I could tell they weren't really here. It was as if they were waiting for the money, not the loss, not the grief, just the check that would come with it. Sarah glanced at me before turning her attention back to the family. There was something different about her today, something I hadn't noticed before. Her usual warmth was replaced with a more restrained, almost cautious demeanor. I could see her eyes flickering to my parents as they took their seats, her gaze lingering for just a moment longer than it should. She cleared her throat softly and broke the silence. "Clara and Victor updated the will last year," she said, her voice calm but guarded. "There's a video, too." Her words were like a jolt to my system. A video? What could they have possibly left in a video, a message, a confession? I leaned forward instinctively, my heart beating faster. The questions started piling up in my mind. What did she mean by that? And more importantly, why was there a video? I had no idea what was going on, what my grandparents had been thinking, what had influenced them to make such a sudden change. As Sarah continued to speak, I couldn't focus on anything except her words. The will, it was updated last year, she repeated. But there's something else. They left this video for you, Emily. I couldn't help but feel a rising tide of anxiety. Something wasn't right. I knew Clara and Victor. They weren't the type to leave behind cryptic messages. They were straightforward, honest. They believed in transparency. So why this? Why now? Did someone get to them before the end? Had they been influenced by something or someone else? I could feel the weight of my family's presence in the room, the air growing heavy as my father's voice cut through the silence. What's all this about, Sarah? What's taking so long? He shifted in his seat, impatience radiating from every movement. Mom barely even looked up. She just fiddled with her bag, her fingers playing with the strap as if she was already detached from whatever was happening in this room. Just give us the will already, Dad added, his tone cold and demanding. I could feel the tension rising between my parents and Sarah. She wasn't in a rush to hand anything over. She knew more than she was saying, and I could see it. I could feel it in the tightness in her jaw, the subtle way she held herself. Something was being held back. But what? I turned my attention back to Sarah, trying to focus on her words. They didn't want you to see the video until now, she continued. They wanted to make sure everything was in place. I swallowed hard. What was that supposed to mean? What was in that video? Why would they leave something like that, something so personal, for only me to see? The room felt cold despite the warmth from the overhead lights. My thoughts were spinning in a whirlpool of confusion and suspicion. I knew that whatever came next, it was going to change everything. The mystery surrounding Clara and Victor's will, the video, the envelope, it was all connected somehow. But the pieces weren't fitting together. Not yet. I glanced at my family again. They were still impatient, distracted. They didn't care about the mystery, not really. They just wanted the money. But I needed answers. I needed to know what had happened. What had they left me in that video? What secrets did Clara and Victor hide? The tension in the room was palpable, thickening with each passing second. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, gnawing at me. The weight of everything that had happened so far hung in the air, but now I could feel it shifting. The questions I had been avoiding were starting to take shape. The mystery wasn't just about money anymore. It was about family. It was about betrayal. It was about everything I thought I knew being turned upside down. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The air in Sarah's office felt suffocating as she finally began to read the will. It had been days since the funeral, and I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't prepared for. My heart raced with every word that Sarah spoke, each syllable making me feel both nervous and eager to know what my grandparents had left behind. I had assumed, no, I wanted to assume, that whatever they left me would be something simple, something with sentimental value, maybe a letter, maybe a piece of their library, something that would keep their memory alive. But as Sarah read the will aloud, her voice steady but carrying an edge of formality, I realized just how wrong I was. Clara and Victor have left their entire estate. Cash, stocks, their $4 million home, and shares in their bookstore chain to you, Emily, she said, her eyes flickering up to meet mine briefly. However, there's a condition. You must complete a literacy project they started, something they believed in strongly. I sat there, frozen. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. My grandparents had left me everything. Everything. The house, the money, the legacy they had built over the years. But the condition, the project, I hadn't even known about it. They had talked about their love for books and literacy, but this was something deeper than I had realized. They trusted me with their legacy, but they had left it to me alone. I glanced over at my parents. My brother, none of them seemed to know what to say. My father's face had gone pale, his jaw tightening with every word Sarah read. I could see his hands balling into fists under the table, and for the first time in my life, I saw the anger that had always been there, simmering just below the surface. No. His voice was cold, like ice cutting through the silence. This isn't right. He slammed his hand on the oak table, the sound echoing in the dimly lit conference room. The force of the impact made me jump, the shock of it rattling me. I hadn't expected this reaction. My stomach churned. Mom gasped, her hand flying up to her mouth, disbelief written all over her face. "This is outrageous, Emily," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Why you? Why not us?" Alex, my brother, shot me a glare, his eyes narrowed with accusation. "You conned them, Emily," he spat, his words laced with venom. "This is just like you to manipulate them into doing this. You always get what you want. Always." The words felt like daggers, each one striking deep into the fragile trust I had left for my family. It was all starting to unravel in front of me. The tension that had been building between us, the resentment that had been bubbling under the surface for years, it was all coming out now. They saw me as the one who had taken something from them, not someone who was given a gift by Clara and Victor. They didn't see me as their daughter, their sister, their family. They saw me as a threat to their greed. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the sound of it deafening in my ears. The words didn't make sense. This couldn't be happening. They couldn't really be this angry, this bitter, could they? They couldn't really be accusing me of manipulation when I had no idea this was coming, when I didn't even know about the condition attached to the inheritance. I glanced at Sarah, hoping for some kind of explanation, but she only gave me a small, sympathetic smile. She knew what was going on. She knew my family better than I did. Her eyes seemed to say it all. This was just the beginning. "Emily, your grandparents, they believed in you," Sarah said quietly, her voice soft. "They wanted you to take their legacy and do something good with it, but—" Her gaze flickered to my family, who were now murmuring among themselves, casting angry looks at me. "This will be hard for them to accept." Hard? I couldn't even fathom how to explain this to them, but I didn't have a choice. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about what Clara and Victor had left behind, what they had trusted me with, and I couldn't let their dreams and values be torn apart by the greed in this room. "You don't get it, do you?" my father sneered, his voice rising in anger. "They're gone, Emily. We should have what's left. It's not fair. We've been here for years. We've worked, His voice trailed off as he looked at me, his gaze full of resentment, his lips pressed tightly together. He was fighting to contain his rage, but I could see the battle in his eyes. He felt betrayed. Betrayed by Clara and Victor's decision. Betrayed by me. My mother, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "I don't understand. Why would they do this? Why you?" Her voice trembled. "We've always supported them. We've been the ones helping them." She looked at me as if I were a stranger, as if this was all my fault. And there it was, the ugly truth, the truth that had been hiding all along. This wasn't about love or family. This wasn't about caring for Clara and Victor. This was about money, about power, about control. I was the one they couldn't control. I was the one who had walked away from their world of status and wealth. I was the one who had chosen a different path, a simpler path. And now they couldn't stand it. They couldn't accept that my grandparents had chosen me, not them. And yet, here I was standing in the middle of a storm I didn't ask for. A storm of anger, greed, and resentment. My family's true colors were showing. They were no longer pretending to care. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about pride, and they were willing to tear me apart for it. I took a deep breath, my heart still racing, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't going to let them control me. I wasn't going to let their anger drown out Clara and Victor's legacy. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to back down. The drive to my parents' Bayview condo felt like an eternity. The fog that clung to the city seemed to follow me, seeping into my thoughts, my doubts. My mind raced as I tried to brace myself for what I knew was coming, another round of pressure. But this time, it felt different. The envelope, the will, the video, everything had shifted. And now my parents were waiting, and I could feel the weight of their expectations bearing down on me. I stepped out of the car, the cool, damp air sticking to my skin as I walked toward the condo. The sleek, modern building loomed above me, its cold glass exterior a sharp contrast to the warmth I remembered in my grandparents' home. The sharp click of my heels echoed in the quiet lobby, and as I entered the condo, I was hit by the sterile, almost clinical atmosphere inside. The cold furniture, the minimalist design, nothing here felt warm. It felt like a showroom, like a space meant to impress, not to live in. I barely had time to take in the room before they were on me. My dad was standing by the window, his back to me as he looked out over the bay. His usual detached calm was replaced by something sharper, more desperate. Mom was seated at the sleek dining table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her smile far too forced to be genuine. She greeted me with that fake sweetness, her tone soft but with an edge I couldn't ignore. "Emily, honey, we've been talking," she began, her voice almost syrupy. "We know this situation is hard on you, but you have to understand, this is about family. You've been given so much. Just think about what you could do with this legacy." Alex walked into the room, his casual stance betraying his impatience. He sat at the table, his eyes never leaving me as he crossed his arms. His gaze was intense, almost calculating. "Yeah, Emily," he chimed in, his tone a little too calm. "You don't need all that cash. You could give a little to us. Help out with my startup, you know? The money's really going to go farther if we all share." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't even trying to disguise it anymore. It wasn't about love or honoring my grandparents' memory. It was about them, about how much they could get from what was left. The inheritance wasn't about me carrying on Clara and Victor's legacy. It was about them wanting a piece of it, and they weren't even pretending. But then my mom's words hit me. "Family sticks together, Emily," she said, leaning forward just a little, her eyes locking onto mine. "Honor the pact. We've always been there for you, and this is how you show your loyalty. This is what family does." The words "honor the pact" echoed in my mind, each one twisting in the air like a slow poison. A pact? What pact? What were they talking about? I had never heard of any pact, never even considered that there might be one. And yet, here they were, pushing me into a corner with these vague references, using guilt to try and manipulate me into signing over the estate. I wanted to ask. I needed to ask. But something about it all felt so wrong. What was this secret they weren't telling me? What deal had been made behind closed doors? Why had Clara and Victor, who had always been so open, kept something like this from me? I took a deep breath, trying to calm the anger rising inside me. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about love. It was about power. It was about control. They had always treated me like I was the outsider, like I didn't belong in their world, and now they were showing me just how deep their greed ran. "No," I finally said, my voice firm. "I'm not giving you any of it." The room fell silent for a beat, and I could hear the soft hum of the city outside, the distant sound of traffic. Everything felt so disconnected. My heartbeat drummed in my ears as the weight of my refusal hung in the air. The tension thickened, choking the space between us. My family's faces twisted with disbelief, then frustration. They hadn't expected me to say no. "You can't be serious. my father finally snapped, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? You can't just keep everything for yourself. This isn't right." Mom's eyes narrowed. "It's your duty to take care of your family, Emily. You've been given a chance to make a difference, but you need to honor the people who've always been there for you. You need to do the right thing." The words, duty, right thing, hit me like a slap. Their voices were full of that same old expectation, that same old pressure to conform to their version of family. It was suffocating. "I am doing the right thing," I said quietly, though my voice felt shaky. "The right thing isn't about giving you money. It's about respecting what Clara and Victor wanted. And they wanted me to do something meaningful with this legacy. They didn't want it to be a tool for you to manipulate." The silence in the room was deafening. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. I could feel the weight of their disappointment, their anger pressing against me. I wasn't just rejecting their demand. I was rejecting everything they had always expected of me, and it felt terrifying. But in that moment, something shifted inside me. My grandparents' lessons on integrity, on doing what was right no matter the cost, those lessons weren't just words. They were a part of me. And I wasn't going to let their memory be twisted by the people who had never cared enough to understand them. The tension was still thick, but I held my ground. I wouldn't let them manipulate me. Not now, not ever. "Think about what you're doing, Emily," Alex warned, his tone colder now. "You can't just walk away from this. We won't let you." But I wasn't backing down. The shadows of doubt they had planted were starting to fade, and I could see the truth more clearly than ever. I was standing at the edge of something bigger than I had ever realized, and I wasn't going to let them drag me down with their lies. I should have known. Deep down, I should have known this was coming. After everything, my family's demands, the greed, the betrayal, it was almost like a punch to the gut when my father looked at me, cold and detached, and said those words. "You were a mistake we never wanted, Emily," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, his eyes colder than I had ever seen them. "And we've been paying for it ever since." It hit me like a sledgehammer. My breath caught in my chest, and the room suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. The walls, the floor, even the air itself seemed to close in around me, leaving me gasping. I couldn't even process what he was saying. I wasn't a mistake. Was I? How could they hide this from me for so long? How could they hate me so much? All these years, all the times I thought I was trying to make things better between us. It was a lie, a farce. And now, they were finally telling me what they had been holding in all this time. Mom's face was unreadable. She didn't speak, but her presence was like a shadow, looming over me. Her silence spoke louder than words. My heart pounded in my chest as the weight of their rejection sank deeper into my bones. I tried to speak, to make sense of it all, but my voice faltered. "How could you say that? How could you hide this from me? I thought I was part of this family." Dad's cold laugh cut through the air. "You've never been part of this family. You've always been a burden. And now we're done. We've put up with you for long enough." Before I could even process what was happening, my father stood up, his face tight with anger. He didn't look at me anymore. He didn't need to. The hatred was clear. "We're done," he repeated, his voice now dripping with finality. "Pack your things. You've got 30 minutes. The locks change tomorrow." My mind scrambled for anything to hold on to, but all I felt was the overwhelming weight of their betrayal crashing down on me. They weren't just pushing me out. They were shattering every illusion of family I had ever clung to. I stumbled back to my childhood bedroom, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The old posters on the walls, the faded colors of the room I had spent so many nights in, felt like a cruel joke now. This room was supposed to be my sanctuary, but now it was a tomb of memories, a place where my trust had been buried. I rushed around, stuffing clothes into an old suitcase. My hands fumbled, shaking with the weight of it all. The floorboards creaked under my feet as if they, too, were mourning the destruction of everything I had believed in. I could still hear my parents' voices echoing in my head, their words like daggers, each one deeper than the last. "You were a mistake." Their words replayed over and over in my mind, each time cutting deeper. How could they say that? How could they hide that kind of hate inside them for so long? How could I have been so blind to it all? The clothes, my life, were being packed up in a frenzy. Each item I shoved into my suitcase a painful reminder of the life I thought I had. The memories of all those nights spent laughing with my family, all those little moments where I thought I belonged, they were all gone now, all replaced with the harsh reality of what my parents truly thought of me. I glanced at the clock. 30 minutes. The words hit me again, and my breath caught. They really meant it. There was no turning back. I took one last look at the room, at the place that used to be my home. The room that had once felt warm, alive with the energy of my childhood, now felt cold and empty. It was a hollow shell, just like the family I had tried so hard to fix. I closed the suitcase with trembling hands, and the sound of the zipper felt like the finality of it all. As I stepped into the hallway, I could hear their voices in the living room, cold and distant, as if I were already gone. My heart shattered just a little bit more with every step I took toward the door. When I reached my SUV in the dark driveway, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I sat there, staring into the darkness in front of me. The engine hummed softly, but the sound was drowned out by the roar in my mind. I couldn't understand how they could do this. How could they throw me out like this, after everything? I drove off, the city lights blurring past me, and I realized this was it. There was no going back. The life I had known was over, and in its place, a future filled with nothing but questions and heartache. Where was I supposed to go now? What was left for me? I didn't have the answers. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I couldn't. I had nothing left to lose. The drive to my grandparents' Victorian home was quiet. The world outside a blur of fog and fading daylight. The roads felt endless, but I couldn't focus on anything other than the tight knot in my stomach. My parents' cruelty still echoed in my mind, each word they had spoken replaying over and over, their betrayal digging deeper with every passing minute. I had left everything behind, my childhood home, my sense of belonging. But now, with the car finally pulling into the driveway of the only place I had ever felt truly at peace, I thought maybe I could find some solace here. This house, once filled with laughter, stories, and the sweet scent of old books, felt like the last thread of my past. It was mine now, or at least it had to be. I parked the car and stepped out into the cold, the sharp scent of the damp earth mixing with the familiar, comforting smell of wood and dust that clung to the air. The house stood before me, dark and silent, its weathered facade hiding the warmth it once held. My breath clouded in front of me, the chill sinking into my skin as I made my way inside. The door creaked open with a familiar groan, the same sound it had made every time I came here as a child. The hallway smelled like the old wooden floors, like the bookshelves lined with pages of history, the smell of coffee drifting faintly from the kitchen. It was all so familiar, so comforting. But beneath it all, there was an eerie emptiness now, a silence where the voices of Clara and Victor used to be. I walked slowly through the house, my footsteps echoing softly in the dim light. It was colder inside than I remembered, the warmth of my grandparents' presence no longer there to fill the space. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was missing. Their absence was suffocating, their absence a reminder of what had been ripped away from me. I made my way upstairs to the guest room. the room I had always stayed in when I visited. The room was just as I remembered it. Dusty, the old furniture still in place, the bed with its quilt folded neatly at the foot. But it felt wrong now. The bed, the walls, the dusty books on the shelves, they all felt like ghosts, reminders of a life that was no longer mine to claim. It was in the corner of the room, hidden behind the old wooden desk, that I saw it. A small drawer, locked and tucked away. My fingers hovered over it for a moment, hesitation in the air. I had always been curious about what was hidden in this house, about the things Clara and Victor kept from me, but I had never dared to open that drawer, not until now. My heart raced as I pulled at the drawer, the creaking of the wood mingling with the sound of my breath. Inside, there were photographs, faded, yellowing pictures of people I didn't recognize. A man in a suit, a woman I had never seen before. Their faces seemed so out of place in this house, like they didn't belong. My fingers trembled as I sifted through the photographs, each one more cryptic than the last. What were these people doing here? And then, buried beneath the pictures, I found a letter, faded and torn, its edges curling as if it had been hidden for years. My breath caught in my throat as I unfolded it, the words barely legible, but clear enough to send a shockwave through my body. "Betrayed trust," the letter began. "The legacy they built was never theirs to begin with. We trusted the wrong person." The words burned in my mind, each one searing its way into my consciousness. Betrayed trust? What was this about? Who had they trusted? And why had they kept this from me? The letter felt like a confession, a revelation of something darker than I could have imagined. I could feel the weight of the secret in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to know more. I needed to know more. But the more I read, the more confused and unsettled I became. I collapsed onto the bed, the letter still clenched in my hands, my body shaking with the force of the emotions flooding through me. The grief for Clara and Victor, the pain of losing them, was crashing over me once more. But now there was something else, something darker, something I hadn't expected. My grandparents weren't just hiding the truth from me. They had been hiding something much bigger, something that tied them to the very people I had trusted most. "Books hold truths, Emily," I remembered Clara's voice, soft but firm, echoing in my mind, even the hard ones. I squeezed my eyes shut, the tears falling before I could stop them. Her voice was gone, but the lessons she had left me still lingered. What truth did they bury Clara? The world outside was dark now, and the house seemed to grow colder. The weight of what I had just discovered was unbearable. Betrayed trust? Who had betrayed them? And why was I left in the dark about it all? I thought I had known Clara and Victor. I thought I had understood them. But now everything was clouded in mystery. I didn't know what to do with this new knowledge. My heart was breaking, not just from their loss, but from the secrets that seemed to stretch out before me, waiting to be uncovered. This letter, this betrayed trust, wasn't just some relic of the past. It was a clue, a key to unlocking everything that had been hidden from me. But what was it hiding? Who had crossed them, and how deep did the deception run? I stood up, the letter still in my hand, and glanced around the room. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. I had no answers yet, only more questions. But one thing was certain. I was going to find out the truth, no matter how deep I had to dig. The first light of dawn had just started to seep through the kitchen window when Sarah arrived, her presence breaking the quiet. She was holding a thermos of coffee, a familiar sight that instantly grounded me. I didn't know how long I'd been sitting in that kitchen, the weight of everything pressing down on me like 1,000 bricks. The house felt emptier, colder, every time I walked through it, yet the warmth from the old stove gave me a moment of comfort. "Morning," Sarah said, her voice steady, but I could see the quiet urgency behind her eyes. She knew this was more than just a simple inheritance dispute. It was war. She poured the coffee into a mug for me, the steam curling in the air, and we both sat down at the old oak table. There was a strange comfort in this, sitting across from someone who had been through the storm with me, someone who understood what was at stake. "Emily, there's something I need to show you," Sarah said, her fingers brushing the laptop she'd set on the table. "Something your grandparents prepared just for you." She hesitated for a second before opening the laptop and turning it toward me. I took a sip of my coffee, trying to calm my racing thoughts, but the moment the screen flickered to life, my stomach dropped. A grainy security cam video filled the screen. It was dark, the footage shaky, but unmistakable. There, in the low light, I could see the figures of Alex and Aunt Karen, my own family, sneaking around the bookstore after the funeral. Their faces were hard to make out, but their actions were clear. They were taking books, rare first editions, and stuffing them into bags. Jewelry, too. And the worst part? They didn't even look like they cared. They acted like they were entitled to everything, as if it was theirs to take. Miguel, the bookstore manager who had worked with my grandparents for over 15 years, was sitting beside Sarah, his face somber. He hadn't said much, but I could see the anger in his eyes as he watched the video with me. "They took first editions," Miguel said, his voice low, almost reverent, as he shook his head. "Books that Clara and Victor spent their lives collecting. Those weren't just books, Emily. Those were pieces of their souls." My heart pounded as the weight of their betrayal crashed down on me. This wasn't just about money. It was about disrespecting everything my grandparents had worked for. The legacy they built wasn't just about the physical things. It was about the values they passed down, the lessons they taught me. And now, my family was ripping that apart piece by piece. Sarah gave me a moment to process it. I could feel my hands shaking as I gripped the mug. The video was a clear warning, a sign that they weren't done. Alex's texts had started flooding my phone again, threats, demands, ultimatums. But now, seeing this, seeing the evidence of their greed, I knew it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. It was about breaking me. But that video, that footage, it was my lifeline. It was my weapon. "They knew this would happen," Sarah said quietly, reading my expression. "Your grandparents, they trusted you. They knew your family would try to take everything. That's why they set this up. For you, they wanted you to have something safe, something they couldn't touch." I stared at the screen, the anger bubbling up in me, mixing with the grief. The betrayal stung, but there was something else now, a burning fire, something that hadn't been there before. My grandparents had planned for this. They had known. They had trusted me to fight for their legacy. Sarah pushed a folder across the table toward me, and I opened it slowly. Inside were documents, legal papers, the cabin. It was a redwood cabin, safe, secluded, and it was in my name. The house wasn't just some remote getaway, it was a haven, a place my grandparents had specifically bought for me, knowing that one day I might need it, knowing that I would have to protect myself from the very people who should have been protecting me. The tears that had been threatening to spill all morning were replaced by something else, a strange sense of relief, a sense of purpose. My grandparents had left me a way out, a place to rebuild, to stand on my own. It wasn't just about the money or the inheritance. It was about them giving me the chance to reclaim what was mine. I looked up at Sarah, a mix of gratitude and determination in my eyes. "This cabin, it's mine?" I asked, barely believing it. "Yes," she said. "It's yours. It's safe, and it's yours to keep. No one can touch it." I sat back in my chair, letting the words sink in. This wasn't just about fighting my family. This was about something bigger. It was about finding my strength, about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, what had always been mine, the weight of the threats, the guilt, the manipulation, Suddenly, it all seemed smaller. I wasn't alone anymore. I had allies now, I had evidence. And most importantly, I had a plan. As I stood up, the sense of empowerment coursing through me was overwhelming. I wasn't going to let my family destroy what Clara and Victor had worked so hard for. I wasn't going to let them tear apart everything I had left. They'd crossed a line. But now, it was my turn to fight back. The tension in the Victorian house had only grown since that morning. The weight of Clara and Victor's legacy, their trust in me, was starting to feel heavier by the minute. The more I uncovered, the more I realized just how deep this went. The house, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a battleground. Every room, every creak of the floorboards seemed to whisper secrets. Secrets I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. But there was no turning back now. Miguel had stayed with me, his quiet strength a small comfort as I waded through the mess my family had left behind. Together we had combed through boxes of old papers, journals, and records, and then, hidden away in a dusty drawer, we found it. Another drive. A digital one this time. I plugged it into the laptop, my heart hammering in my chest as the screen flickered to life. The files were overwhelming. I clicked on the first journal entry, and my stomach dropped. It was a record of family demands, unpaid loans, forged documents. It was as if the family had been trying to take what they could for years. But the worst part? They had been stealing from Clara and Victor long before they passed. Emails, receipts, and financial records detailing their attempts to manipulate and control. Every page made me feel more betrayed. Miguel, standing next to me, was silent. I could see the anger in his eyes, a mix of disbelief and disappointment. They tried to borrow millions, never paid back, he muttered, as if the words themselves left a bitter taste in his mouth. I nodded, my own disgust building with each line I read. We went through more files, each one more damning than the last, a digital archive of every secret, every betrayal. But as I scrolled, my fingers froze over the next file, a journal entry that mentioned something strange, a turncoat relative. I felt a chill run down my spine. A turncoat? Who could it be? Was there someone else in the family who had been playing both sides all along? I pulled up the next file, hoping for more clarity, but instead it was a series of threatening emails. They've been watching me. My mind raced as I scanned through the messages. "You don't belong here," one email said. "Give up the fight or you'll lose more than just money." The last one was signed with an anonymous name. I couldn't breathe. Someone had been watching me. Someone knew what I was doing and they were not happy about it. The sense of unease I'd been carrying grew into a knot in my stomach. I glanced at Miguel, who was looking at the screen too, his expression grave. "Someone's been leaking information," I said quietly, my voice trembling. Before I could process any more, my phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a message. I didn't recognize the number. I hesitated for only a second before opening it. "You trust the wrong people, Em." My heart skipped a beat. Who was this? And more importantly, who were they warning me about? Miguel's face grew even more somber as he read the message over my shoulder. "You have to be careful. Not everyone is on your side." His words echoed in my mind, and the weight of the situation hit me all at once. The more I uncovered, the more questions I had. The trust I had in the people around me was starting to unravel. But who? Who was betraying me? Just then, the doorbell rang, breaking the stillness. I almost jumped. It was Lena and Mrs. Patel, the neighbor. I hadn't expected company, especially not today. I opened the door to find Lena holding a large portfolio under her arm, Mrs. Patel by her side with a casserole dish in her hands. "We brought some lunch," Lena said, her smile warm, but her eyes quickly flicked to the tense atmosphere in the room. "Thought you might need a break." Mrs. Patel placed the casserole on the counter, her presence comforting in its own way. "We've all been worried about you, dear," she said softly. "Clara and Victor would have wanted us to help." Their warmth was a stark contrast to the coldness I'd felt from my family. Lena and Mrs. Patel, with their kindness, grounded me for a moment. They didn't know the full weight of what I was uncovering, but they could feel the shift. I could see it in their eyes. They were here for me, no matter what happened. We sat down at the table together, the plates of food before us offering a strange sense of normalcy in a world that felt like it was turning upside down. But the sense of unease didn't leave me. Every time I looked at my phone or the documents on the screen, I knew something darker was lurking beneath the surface. Lena looked at me, her brow furrowing. "Emily, is everything okay? You look distant?" I didn't know how to answer. How could I explain the weight of the truth I was carrying? How could I tell her that the people I trusted most, the ones I'd called family, had betrayed me? That I was now facing threats, and worse, I had no idea who I could trust. I took a deep breath, the warm smell of the casserole filling the air, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't alone. I had allies, and together we were going to expose the truth, no matter what it took. The video, the documents, the threats, they were just the beginning. I was about to take the fight to the next level. But first, I needed to know who was really in this with me. Who could I trust? And then, who was the traitor? It was still dark when they came, pounding on the door like a storm. The sound echoed through the Victorian house, jolting me awake from a restless sleep. My heart was already racing, my mind reeling from everything I had uncovered. I wasn't ready for this. Not yet. But I had no choice. The time had come. I quickly glanced around the room. Miguel, Lena, and Sarah were already there, standing by the table where all the evidence was laid out. Footage, journals, emails. The truth. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about fighting for what was right, for what Clara and Victor had trusted me with, and I wasn't going to let my family destroy that. The door trembled under the weight of their knocks, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they broke it down. The fear, the uncertainty, I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, but in that moment, as I stood there with my allies, something inside me hardened. I wasn't afraid anymore, not of them, not of anyone. I took a deep breath and opened the door. There they were, my parents, Alex, Aunt Karen, all standing in the hallway. Their faces were tight, angry, like they had expected me to crumble by now, but I wasn't going to back down, not now. "What's this, Emily?" my father sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you've won? This isn't over." I stood there, calm, even as the fury in my chest burned hotter with every word he spoke. Behind me, the others watched silently, their support a steady force in the background. I motioned for them to come in, and as they did, the weight of the confrontation grew. Miguel, Lana, and Sarah formed a semicircle around the table. The evidence spread out before us like a declaration of war. The footage from the security cameras, the emails detailing everything my family had tried to do, and the journals revealing just how far they had gone to manipulate and betray my grandparents. They took in the scene, eyes flicking from one document to the next. The shock was evident on their faces, but it didn't last long. I could see the anger bubbling up, the denial setting in, but the truth was undeniable. "Do you see it now?" I asked, my voice shaking but firm. "All of it. Every lie, every betrayal. You're not fooling anyone." My father stepped forward, his face red with fury. "This is all you're doing, Emily. You think you've got it all figured out, but you've destroyed everything." He was shouting now, and for a moment I almost felt the sting of his words. But then, the door creaked open behind me, and I turned, expecting more of the same. But it wasn't more of the same. It was Uncle Tom. He stepped into the room, his face pale, his expression weary. He was the last person I expected to walk through that door, but there he was, His shoulders slumped, his hands shaking slightly as he took in the scene before him. I couldn't believe what happened next. Tom started, his voice faltering. I can't keep lying anymore. There was a sharp silence in the room. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard him right. Tom continued, his voice quiet but steady now. I drafted a fake will. I was the one who forged it. I thought if Clara and Victor were declared incompetent, then everything would go to you, Dad. But I can't keep covering for this. My mind spun as his words sank in. Uncle Tom? My uncle? The one person I thought was neutral, who I thought had stayed out of the mess, had been a part of it all along. His confession echoed in my ears as I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just a betrayal from my parents. This was something deeper. My own flesh and blood had been plotting against me, against Clara and Victor. It wasn't just about money or the estate. It was about their desperate need for control, for power, even over the memory of people who had loved them unconditionally. You betrayed us? My father spat, his face twisted in rage. You were in on this. How could you turn on us like this? But Tom didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at me, his eyes filled with remorse. I was wrong, Emily, he said quietly. I didn't want to see it, but now I know. This isn't just about money. You're doing the right thing. The room was silent. My parents were speechless, their faces pale as the full weight of what Tom had confessed to sank in. Their plans, their manipulation, it was all falling apart. I wasn't the one who had destroyed my family. They had destroyed themselves with their own greed, their own lies. And then, just as it seemed like they were on the verge of crumbling, a text buzzed on my phone. I didn't need to look at it to know who it was from. Alex. I had already received dozens of threats from him in the past few days, but this one was different. This time, it was simple, chilling. This isn't over. I felt the blood drain from my face. He wasn't backing down. Neither was my father. Neither were any of them. The battle was far from over. But something in me shifted. I wasn't going to let them win. Not after everything they'd done. Not after everything I had uncovered. They had come to tear me down. But now, they were the ones who were falling apart. And I was done waiting. 6 months have passed, yet it feels like a lifetime. So much has changed in such a short time. I stand on the other side of it now, not as the person I once was, but as someone stronger, someone more focused. I can't help but reflect on everything that's happened, everything I've gone through to get here. It all started with the inheritance, the $22 million my grandparents had left me. But that was just the beginning. I took that money and invested it in something that meant more than just financial security. I started the Clara and Victor Literacy Foundation. It felt like the only way to honor them, to live up to what they had given me, a legacy of learning, of knowledge, of books. They'd spent their whole lives building something meaningful, and now I was going to carry that torch. The foundation now has $8 million dedicated to funding reading programs across the country, providing books, resources, and opportunities to kids from all walks of life. It's not just about giving them something to read. It's about giving them a chance to believe in themselves, a chance to dream. And I've seen firsthand how that small spark of opportunity can ignite a fire in someone's life. Kids who were once told they couldn't, now seeing that they can. And that's where the real change happens. Not in the money, but in the hearts of the people you reach. And in addition to the foundation, I've been able to pour myself even deeper into my yoga practice. For years, it's been my passion, my way of finding peace and balance in a world that was always trying to knock me off my feet. But now, teaching yoga feels like a privilege, a responsibility. Every breath I guide my students through, I feel connected to something bigger, To Clara, to Victor, their lessons still echo in me, in every word I say, every movement I make in class. It's not just about flexibility, it's about strength. It's about the mental clarity to know what's important in life. But perhaps the most profound moment came just last week. I walked the familiar trail by the cemetery where Clara and Victor are buried. The sun was shining, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. The light danced across the wildflowers, and the breeze felt like a soft whisper of their presence. I had something with me, a book from Clara's personal collection. It wasn't just any book. It was one that had touched their hearts, one that had guided them in their journey. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I stood in front of their graves, holding the book in my hands, and without a second thought, I placed it on the desk of a young kid who had just received a scholarship through the foundation. His wide eyes, his trembling hands, the way he ran his fingers across the cover. It was everything. It was a quiet, intimate moment, but it meant the world to me. Clara's voice echoed in my mind. Books hold truths, Emily, even the hard ones. And in that moment, I finally understood. It wasn't about the inheritance. It was about the truth they had left me, the legacy they wanted me to continue, a legacy of giving back, of making sure their love and teachings lived on, not just in my heart, but in the lives of others. The kid looked up at me, his voice full of wonder. "This book means I can go to college," he said. His words hit me harder than I expected, a lump forming in my throat. A new chapter was beginning for him, one filled with possibility. And for me, and for Clara, and for Victor. Their love, their guidance was reaching far beyond their own lives. It was changing the world one person at a time. They had given me more than money. They had given me a purpose, a reason to fight, a reason to stand up for something bigger than myself. And now, as I stand here, reflecting on everything that's come before, I realize that all the heartbreak, all the betrayal, and all the pain, it was worth it. It brought me here, to a place where I can continue their legacy, where I can make a difference. I'm no longer just their granddaughter. I'm the keeper of their story, their values, and their mission. And I get to share that with the world. I think back to my family, the ones who betrayed me. They never understood what truly mattered. They thought wealth was the answer. But Clara and Victor showed me something different. True wealth isn't in money. It's in the people you touch, the lives you change, the legacies you build. Family isn't about blood. It's about heart. And that's the family I've built now, one rooted in integrity, kindness, and purpose. As I look out over the quiet trail, the warmth of the sun on my face, I can feel Clara and Victor with me. They're in the air around me, in the stories, in the books. And now, I get to pass that on. I get to share that love with the world. That's what they gave me, and that's what I'm giving back. Ever faced family betrayal over money or stood up for what's right? Share below. Like if this moved you, subscribe for more, and tag a friend who needs to hear that true family is heart, not inheritance.